Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Larry Milliken. I'm the manager of scholarly communications at the Drexel University Libraries. Welcome to the library's first 2021 Open Access Week event, Adopting Open Educational Resources at Drexel University. The libraries has been leading the charge to bring open access to Drexel for the last few years by educating the university community about the benefits of OA and also by helping faculty adopt OA resources for their courses. This year, we're excited to continue these efforts by celebrating Open Access Week. We're hosting another session tomorrow called Preprints, Open Access, and the Role in Scholarly Communication. I encourage you to attend, and Stacy is going to put a link in the chat to that event. Today's session focuses on creating and adopting open educational resources for courses. And I'm going to start by introducing our panelists, all of whom are from the Department of English and Philosophy. We have joining us Anne Erickson, who's Assistant Teaching Professor, Margene Petersen, Assistant Teaching Professor, Fred Siegel, Director, First Year Writing Program and Teaching Professor of English, and Maria Volynsky, Associate Director, First Year Writing Program, ESL Coordinator, and Associate Teaching Professor. Also, we have our own Elise Farrar, Librarian for Information Access and Undergraduate Learning, who will moderate the discussion. So thank you all for attending, and I'm going to turn it over to Elise.
Okay, great. Thank you, Larry. So I'm going to moderate today's panel. I have some questions I've prepared, and then we'll leave some time near the end of the hour for your questions. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm really interested in talking about this project because it's been something I've worked on along with some of these faculty members. We had other faculty who were helping us as well. So I'd like to get started with asking you if you can describe, if any of you want to describe this open educational resource that was created and, really what it is.
Should I start? I can start.
Yeah, you can start. Go ahead.
Okay. A bit of history is that, when I started teaching at Drexel in English 101, we required 3 books. There was a handbook, there was a rhetoric book, and there was a book of readings. And it's with the books getting more and more expensive all the time, and with the fact that we were, you can only read this much of a book. So they're spending $100 or so on books and only reading, $15 worth of them. And what's more, much of this material is in a lot of other places, for free. So we have long fantasized about being able to not have to assign books, which is not to say that people can't if they want to in their sections, but we wanted to make it very clear and easy for them to have other ways to get the information they needed. Now, this year worked out for a few reasons. One, I think there are more open access resources that are good, that are available than there were a few years ago. Second of all, Elise Farrar sent me an email about wanting to support this stuff and maybe finding ways to do it, and she was kind enough to help. So what this is, or how it has evolved, and from what I needed it to do as the director of the first year writing program, I needed students to be able to access the important information about how to write papers in English 101, 102, and 103. And we, with the help of Elise and several other people, some people who are here and some people who are not here, and with the help of some folks in the computer area, especially Michael Shellman, we came up with let's say this: Maria and Anne, who are here. They're in one of these, things. They're here, and they figured out a preliminary order. What what this thing should look like. We came up with 6 sections, and then we started populating these 6 sections with materials that are available for free and that are good. And I've lost track of whether I'm answering the question. So
no, that's great. I think one more detail, Fred, if you could add, about how many students does this impact? How many students are currently using this? How many students might be using this per year? To give folks who don't know the first year writing program some context.
First year writing program touches every student who comes to Drexel University. There's English 101, 102, 103. Some people test out of 101 and they only take 102 and 103. But this term, I forget how many new students, 2,800 or 2,700 or something like that. So these are students who might use this. Now it's brand new. So and with any new instructors, they're using a template for Blackboard that has these sources already in them, but some people might not be using it. Some people might have their own stuff. I've heard anecdotally that there are some people who are enjoying it and are finding it useful. And I haven't heard anyone complain that we haven't asked people to buy books.
Yeah, no one's going to complain on that one. Yeah, Anne.
I think it's important to note we do still require students to buy the 33rd, which is an annual anthology that we produce in-house, which has a collection of readings from last year. And if you're not already familiar with this great resource that we have here, you should really make yourself aware of it because it's super important. And it gives our students an opportunity to become published. And it provides us with a great resource in terms of those readings that Fred had alluded to at the beginning as being one of the 3 components that allows us to have current, relevant, ever-changing secondary sources, and it's only $10. So we brought their book expense from 100 potentially down to 10.
Yeah. And if you're interested in the 33rd, there are some copies on reserve at Haggerty Library too, that you can always take a look at if you're, if the copies of the bookstore are gone or, you're not able to purchase a copy.
I happen to know someone who might be able to get you a copy.
Okay.
Joke for anybody who knows. Gail Rosen is the editor of the 33rd.
Ah, yes.
Okay. And I may or may not be married to her.
Yeah. So I think, Fred, you talked a little bit about your reasoning for working on this. And I'd like to hear from anyone else on the panel. What's your motivation for working on this, contributing to this, working on this project together? Because it wasn't something that, I don't think any of us had to do this. So if you could talk about some of your motivation for that.
If you don't mind, I'll say a few words. There are a lot of reasons. One of the reasons for a certain group of instructors who work with international students, especially during the pandemic, our students were away. And shipping the book that we required for our courses was sometimes very expensive and sometimes just unrealistic for them. So they were left without the book. We as instructors had to quickly adjust. Not that we can't, of course we can, we're awesome instructors. But it just created a little bit of a chaos and really told us that we need something that students always have access to. They don't need to struggle. And we can continue having this, I don't like the word uniform, but consistent instructions that all students have access to all the materials, and we can provide instruction that's available to everybody and that's understandable to everybody. So that was one of the things that I think prompted me to jump into this group as soon as Fred said, who wants to work on this? Yes, I do, to make sure that especially this group of students who are far away and don't have access to a lot of things, we still have students who are away. They have access to everything that we're doing. Inclusivity, here we go.
Right, I agree with what Maria was saying is that, allowing the international students to have access immediately, or any student It's not a case I'm waiting for Amazon to send me the book. I can't get to it. That was one reason. But another reason for me to join this group this summer was, I had been just browsing around through materials and was amazed at how many more, open educational resources there were compared to like about 5 years ago when there was a book committee, like which book should we be using, choose one. And it's like, a lot of people wanted, this kind of open access, free material, but there just wasn't as much. I mean, it's amazing how much material is out there now.
I think it was also good timing because we had all been working so much online. And so we were at a time where we were really ready to create that. And we had students everywhere. So even if they were in the United States and with shipping in the post office and all the things that we've had go on in the last year and a half, it seemed like something that a lot of us were already kind of doing on our own anyway. So it just made it more uniform, as Maria was saying. And even now, like if you have a student who ends up having to quarantine and move quickly, they're going to have their computer with them. So they're going to have access to those resources no matter where they are. So it just makes it that much easier, no matter what your situation is.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. So I want to talk a little, we touched on this a little bit, but I want to talk about the process that went through. So, I was wondering if any of you could describe the process that we went through, the timeline, and, general steps and how we got this done really, or how you got this done. Yeah, Anne.
So Fred said, this is when I need it by to create all the stuff for the new people, and said, this is when we would need to do it if this is something we really want to do, which was really useful. And Maria and I both kind of wanted a structure before we went into it. So although everybody was confused what we were talking about, she and I had a session where we nailed down like what exactly we thought we needed. And we were really thinking just 101 because we were taking a small bite at this apple. And Fred was worried about the timing. So we really were just kind of focused on 101. But as time went on and the resources started adding, we started putting in more stuff for 102 along the way. In a natural manner, which was good. So our original commitment wasn't that big and had the intention of growing down the road. And that was really useful. And once we came up with the structure, we had a larger group of people who were all just adding lots and lots of ideas of things that they like to use and the reasons they like to use it. And then it got a little tricky because you don't want to have too many things and have it be too overwhelming. So there's a delicate balance to be held there. And it was a very kind of egalitarian and anonymous system of nominating things too, because people just throw the links in there. And then I think one of the issues that I found particularly interesting is I really wanted it to look professional when our students got to it. And a lot of times people who were throwing things in there were not following the order that we had set up already, either in terms of necessarily where they were on the page and also the formatting for the technology we were using to create it all in a consistent manner. So kind of keeping a check and balance on that was important. And also then making sure, like when you get to a point where you're ready to share it with other people, that it's locked in so that random people can't just keep popping in and changing things and making you neurotically check it. That's my thought.
Yeah. And just so you know, Anne Erickson was particularly involved in the hands-on, making sure it all looks good, making sure it's not overwhelming. So thank you for that. And everybody, of course, did their share.
Yes.
I mean, it's much more than I expected. All I really needed was, I have a core syllabus for English 101, and it has references to the previous textbook. And all I wanted to be able to do was have something to replace each of those references so that people teaching 101 can, instead of buying the, the Norton Field Guide, which is good. It was, as those books go, it was a good one. But instead of having to do it, they can click on this thing instead of chapter 2 in the Norton Field Guide. And it's has much more in it than I originally hoped it would have. which is fine because it turns out that different people want to use different pieces.
Mhm. Yeah,
People
that's
have their
one.
own.
That's one thing I like about it is well, I haven't been using it, but the flexibility in terms of having things that people can pick and choose from.
Yeah.
So now that we're talking about this, I'm realizing, because we're so close to this, that a lot of people don't know, what form this took. So I don't know if you want to talk about the form it took, how it's being hosted, kind of also how it got to that place.
Anybody else want to take it, or I can?
Well, Fred set up SharePoint, as I recall, and worked with Michael, right? Shelton?
Yeah, we'll say Michael set up SharePoint.
Michael set up SharePoint. With
Michael
Fred
Shellman
joined.
in academic technologies.
Right.
Yeah, we gave him what we wanted to do, and he made it look nice.
Right.
Yeah, bow down.
And from I don't know if I can speak for everyone, but it was great that because of SharePoint and what Anne and Maria had already put up as kind of the outline for the structure, when I was, combing through different materials, different sites, I could, if I found something that was related to, primary research, I could pop it in, and someone else could find something and pop it in, which was great. So we were able to, various people could just add, and drop it in, initially. So the SharePoint format worked really well. I thought it was really a good way to go. And
just to be clear, not everybody can drop stuff in there. People who are in
only on the committee. Yes, not everyone.
So don't you go in there and put in,
Yes. Only people.
It's not Wikipedia.
Yes.
No.
Yeah, that's what would happen. It would be Wikipedia after a while.
Well, maybe sometimes not a bad thing, but I think with this, you want to have some control over what's there, what isn't there, and also how things look. Because I think that was, that really is a struggle with something like this. You can have people doing things all sorts of ways. So I know Anne, and I don't know if anyone else was involved in this, went through and really standardized how things looked, which was really nice. Almost like the editor.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
I'm on the other side from you on my views. Margene.
Okay.
So are there any other things that you thought were very well organized in the creation of this, and it worked because we did it this way, or anything about the creation and putting it together that you want to add?
I think one of the things that really worked well, that after we had this initial structure, we got together and decided who will be working on each section. Not that I went through all the open resource looking for everything. We distributed these people are working on this section, these people are working on that section. And of course, if we found something that belonged not to my section, we were free to add it to that section. But this distribution, I think, really helped us stay organized, stay within the timeline, and make it happen.
I think it also made it not too cumbersome. I know Fred keeps saying I did a lot, but mostly my main concern was I kept thinking it was done, and then it wasn't. I had to go in and tweak other things. That was the concern. I was like, oh no, I thought I had it good. But nobody felt like they had too much work. We all contributed some to it. We all felt some ownership in it. We all felt invested in it, but I don't think it was really a cumbersome project for anybody to do because there were many hands, and you didn't feel like you were obligated to be writing a whole book yourself. There were so many of us who stepped up and contributed significant things that they'd already tested in their classes. And I think that made it a lot more successful. So it wasn't even just like grasping for things. It was just sharing resources that people were already using very successfully in a manner. So I thought it was pretty seamless.
Yep.
Is there anything you might have done differently if you were saying, okay, we're going to do this next summer for English 102 or English 103, well, probably not for English 103, but anything you're like, well, next time I'll do it this way?
We did have one challenge. in some
Okay.
resources electronically moved. And so we had already created all these links and everything and made them viable and useful, and then they were no longer working, which is a pragmatic concern because at any point in time, your electronic resources can do that. So we had some long conversations about having PDF backups and so forth to make sure that our students would continuously have access without us having to panic over them.
Mhm.
I don't know. Did we ever follow up on that?
We have to follow up on some of that. We have to make a schedule where we periodically go through and make sure everything that's supposed to be there is there.
Yes.
You
And to
most
also
of these
work
things
with
are well established. The things that really are going to be there,
Right.
although the link might change or something.
right.
Mhm.
And to also work with the lease and the libraries for some things that, that we could have, like the book is, owned by the library. There might be something that we'd like to have, which would be there permanently for certain things. I know we were having trouble not finding a lot for profiles.
Yeah.
And so, to be able to work with Elise, who's helped us so much to, be able to use a snippet here and there to fill in if there was something we loved in Norton or some other books, and I feel that's more secure in terms of the permanent link.
Yeah, exactly. Because there are some things that, for better or for worse, are not on the web.
Right.
And if it's something you've been using for years and years, luckily we're in a place where copyright allows us, if we own it in the libraries, we can scan something and put it in reserve within Blackboard behind that institutional link. So that does allow for some content that might not be on the web for whatever reason, but a faculty member has been using it for a long time, and that kind of adds to that OER, that open resources. And I know sometimes putting things on course reserve is another way that textbook costs can be reduced.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing we should mention is that we're using many fabulous resources from Hagerty Library, some of which I think Elise put together, and some of which may have been there before.
Just because this is being hosted by the libraries doesn't mean you need to put in all these.
No, also one part we didn't talk about in our process was Elise went through, after we threw all these things in there, and checked them all to make sure that they were fair use, because she is the expert on that, and we all bow down to her. Because that we could make sure that while we were sharing this large thing rather publicly, that we were doing it correctly, which I think was really important.
Yeah.
A little bit iffy.
Yeah. Although this resource is also behind a Drexel secured password. So people outside of Drexel. So technically this would not be fully open, but open within the Drexel community, which adds a little layer of, I don't know how much protection. I'm not a copyright expert. I'm definitely not aware. So yeah.
It's open enough to make any individual here nervous. So,
yeah. Yeah.
It's nice to be.
I think it was also very educational for me personally to really understand what's open resources and can be used and hosted everywhere and what's not. That you can go online, find a great article and just put it into our resources. We can do that. So maybe when you say I would have it differently, I would have done a little bit more research on all this before I started looking for sources to understand. I mean, I know it now, but it would be great to have this knowledge before that. And it's not that we were learning while doing. So it's one of the great lessons learned for me, all these distinctions, what's where and how can be used.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point of learning too, for librarians who are working with faculty, spend some time with faculty, talking about what open really is. And, and also I think what comes into this too is open source versus things that are, the copyright is held by someone and the copyright is more restrictive. Because I think sometimes, and easily so, open educational resources can be conflated with open source, and they're two slightly different things. So I do want to bring that up because I know, and Larry is much more of the expert on this. In fact, I consulted with Larry on some of this too, just to make sure that, you know, I had the right information that I was sharing as well. So I'd like you also to kind of pivot a little bit. I really want, because I haven't heard this from you at all, I want to know how you've been using these resources this fall. And also, you know, if you can talk about how other faculty that you're, you know, working with are using them.
Well, I'm in 102. I'm teaching 102, and this wasn't really specifically put together for 102. It was kind of an afterthought that we added. But the assignment for the final paper is to write a researched argument using in the topic of the class, which is deception, and use the, you know, read chapter blah blah, whatever the chapter was. There's an explanation of how an argument tends to be put together, the parts of an argument and how they're put together. So my students are reading that this week. We're still doing an annotated bibliography now. There is a section on how to do an annotated bibliography also in there that we drew upon in getting them ready to do that assignment. So two of my three assignments for this term are dependent on students reading some material on how to do it. For me, that's what this thing is mostly for. I never want students to not understand what the paper is. As much as I can explain it in class, I also want to be able to say, go to page blah blah, and do that. You know, so I'm able to do that for those two assignments. Now, on the other, in 101, we have a number of new instructors who are using the 101 template, which is the point of that is to have you can just drive it, just do what it says in there. There's a folder for each week, and there are readings each week, and some of those readings are open source readings, and the other readings are from the 33rd. So that's the way people are using it. I'm hearing people are liking the backpacks and briefcases reading for 101. I've been observing some of the new instructors in class, and I just listened to someone teach a class on that reading that everybody read from the resource.
Oh, nice.
So that's how it works.
Nice. Have any of you received feedback from students about using these resources?
They're very excited not to have to buy another book. They really are. Like the first week of class, you're like, you need to buy a $10 book, and the rest is all online. And they're kind of excited about that. And then pointing out that they can look at this stuff later too, because it's just a link that they can use as long as they're within the Drexel community. So if a bit of information that they think they might want down the road further, they can virtually save it, and they don't have to have the book on their shelf.
I don't know that I hear positive things about the resource as much as I'm enjoying not hearing negative things about having to buy a $100 book. You know?
Yeah, I asked in the teaching circle I'm part of, I asked, well, what do you think? I decided to ask that directly because I know Elise had sent out the questions. And overall, they liked that it was, open resource. They enjoyed they thought the readings were going well. I did hear from one faculty member who's just in the hallway was like, why aren't we using Norton? I thought that was working well. And why did we go to OER? And I said, well, we're trying to, make it available. It's free, and it'll be up to date. So that was the only why aren't we using the book?
Well, I hope that faculty member knows that there was no requirement that they not use it.
That's what I said. You can.
I sent it out.
Want to
explaining that you want to use Norton, God bless.
But one thing I like is, for example, we had at least 2 resources on thesis, how to create a thesis. I said, well, you could look at both of them. They're written in different ways, different authors, and, I'd sort of review them, but they, like you said, they're there for the students to read through and, whichever one they, works for their, learning style or
Yeah,
what
that's
approach they like better. Because some are more graphic, much more visual. Others are heavier on the, denser on the writing. So there's, different materials for them.
Yeah, that's a good point. In terms of the materials, there's usually at least like 2 or 3 of everything. So you can say, if this doesn't make sense, if you're struggling with this one, take a look at this. This might be easier for you to digest in, based on how you learn. Yeah, Maria, sorry.
That's what I have on my BibleLearn, especially since I'm teaching an online asynchronous class. I have to organize BibleLearn really well. So I have readings for the week, and there are fewer readings, and then I have a folder in that folder that says additional resources. So students know what they have, the bare minimum to understand the concept. But then if this doesn't work for them and they want to know more, they go to that folder. The good thing, they don't need to look for it online or somewhere. This is available for them right away. Click on it and go. And when I started, one of my concerns was that with international students, a lot of times they don't even know what audience is or stance or purpose of the writing because they don't cover it back in their countries, different styles of education, different cultures of writing. And so my concern was, will we be able to deliver it to our students with this resource? If Norton did a good job, they would read an article, we will come discuss, and after reading the chapter and discussions, they understood. And I found that it works great. The discussions online show me that the students do understand the concept, they know how to apply them. So the sources that we chose, not only convenient, but they are working really well with the population that may need more help than a regular American student.
Any other thoughts on that? Impressions of using this, impressions from students?
I did think that when Maria and I were working together on creating the outline, it was really useful because she does teach in the English language learners. So we have courses that do the same material, but have different emphasis and different needs. So I thought it was really great to have, and it was just the two of us really wanted a structure before we headed into this. I think it's just both the way we work. It was really nice to have that complementarity of subject knowledge and knowledge of our students' needs and those different aspects to be able to kind of address what we thought they would need more fully and how that would work. And it was really nice to have.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't think any of us thought that when the both of you were like, we'll take on this role. So I think one of the things I want to touch on now or talk about now is, what do you see as next steps for this, or any future plans to build on this? Obviously, we talked about having to maintain this resource. That's one of the, unfortunately, downsides of OER is maintaining resources, especially when it comes to links on the web. But I wonder, if you start to think about, well, what's next here?
Well, I mean, we could probably add more 102 resources. And while we haven't been thinking much, because 103 classes tend to be a lot different, on the other hand, there are general, a lot of 103 classes involve writing about literature, and I'm sure there are some general sources that we could find about that people might be able to draw upon. So I mean, we could certainly add more resources. We can get rid of resources when we find stuff that's better. I guess one of the things this meeting is telling me is that I have to arrange every term we have to have, somebody has to, maybe one person has to be in charge of checking the links in this section. Another person has to be in charge of checking the links in another section, and making sure it all still works.
I was thinking also, do we want to at some point ask do some sort of assessment to find out,
Yes.
are there sources that we're not using that we should get rid of? And then also like publishers update things, not just so they can charge you more money, but because things start to feel stale after a while. So dated that you're just like, oh.
Yeah.
So that's another aspect that we're gonna kind of be shopping for new things as well and figuring out what's not working as well. So maybe like an annual assessment to figure that out.
Mm-hmm.
Good idea.
No.
I think also some type of assessment of, the instructors and even the students, like, what do you think? How's it working for you? What do you like about it? Just maybe a survey monkey or something would be. But I agree with Fred, it'd be kind of cool to come up with something for 103/113, or even create our own book. Because there's actually quite a few, there was some like the University of Virginia, a couple other places where they had written their own OER book. So that way everything was consistent because it was their own,
Right.
their own book.
I hesitate to do that until somebody gives us money and we can pay people to do that.
That would be ideal.
That's a major hunk of work to do.
Didn't this all start because Elise found a grant that could have funded it?
Yeah.
And we didn't end up doing that, but it made us start having the conversation again.
Yeah.
At least we'll have to find us that grant so we can do that.
Oh, yeah. No pressure. At least find the money for us.
Right,
We
Elise.
can't do the whole thing without Elise finding the money.
I think the big struggle, at least, I don't know if you all feel this at Drexel, but finding the time, not just to apply for a grant to get money, but then, when do you work on it? When do you write the textbook? I think that's always the struggle I feel at Drexel.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, at this stage, I'm happy only dealing with existing things.
Yeah. I think that's the part of what made this easy was that, a lot of us had resources in mind, including myself, that we were already using, and let's just all put it all in one place. Let's organize it. Let's, Anne wrote some great introductions to things that, hopefully didn't take too much of her time. Yeah. So one more question. Do you have any advice for faculty members who are interested in creating an OER or some sort of open textbook?
Having a good team. I think we had an excellent team.
Yeah.
Teamwork.
I hope that everybody in the group felt that their opinions and their ways of doing things were validated. I hope everyone felt comfortable, and I hope everyone felt collaborative about it. And I think that's important. One thing is we didn't. I mean, or at least I didn't. I didn't go look for some resource that explained how to put together an OER. I started with these pretty modest needs. I just wanted to replace, 6 readings or so from a textbook with things that were not in a textbook, just maybe if I knew more, I would have had trouble. Maybe in my ignorance, I was just able to, we were able to just start flying this machine. What's that metaphor about putting the airplane together while
you're flying?
Building the airplane as you're flying.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like that's the Drexel way sometimes. So.
But I think Fred touched upon something very important, that he needed to replace it. So if you start doing it just for fun, I have some free time, that when you do need it, their need, you need to need it. And if you need it, then it works. I mean, maybe that's why before it was a good idea to have our own resources, but we did not really need it that much. And that's why we procrastinated a little. And here, with everything that was happening, we already started to need it, not just want it.
And there was also a webinar by Olena Zhatko and what was her last name? Last name was Susan Coe. And I watched that. It was, about an hour, and it was very helpful looking at, what is, the common creative licensing, and, they have a whole book if you want to read it, but, they just went through some of the steps. But you're right, Fred. I think knowing too much, sometimes you're like, wow.
I'd have been paralyzed. I would have been.
Well, that's what paralyzed you. Like you said, you need like a grant and have a group of people dedicated to it, like over the summer, so that you could really spend, 4 weeks together, kind of, or whatever.
And if it didn't work, we would have just had them buy the Norton again.
This is true. You're right.
I mean,
yeah.
Also, Michael Shelmett was an incredible resource because we could look at Elise and say, double check all our stuff is really available. And we could look at him and go, all right, we have this concept. And he's like, here's what you need. I'm going to set it up for you. And then I'm going to have a workshop and show you how you can add to it and use this new technology that you haven't used before. And that made it super easy because we didn't have to like shop for those things or figure it out. The Shelmett just was there with it.
And fortunately, Anne was good at listening to Shelmett and was able to do it all. I relied a lot on Anne. I mean, I was able to put some stuff up, but Anne was very helpful.
It was really user friendly. I found it really easy, but trying to find it and navigate it without that head start would have made it a more onerous project.
Well, and also I think he helped us identify what tool. We kind of came with this, well, this is what we're thinking about. This is the idea. And he was like, well, this would work, or this would, and he's like, well, why don't you use this? And it's like, okay, it's almost like the concierge.
Right. I love most about working with him is he understands the pedagogy. So when you come to him with any question and you say, these are my concerns and this is what I'm hoping to do, and he asks more questions so he really understands. So when he answers you, I don't ever feel like this is what we already have available, or this is what we bought into, or this is what I've been trained on. I always feel like his answers are supporting your pedagogical intent in a very positive manner. So we're very fortunate.
Yeah, that's true.
Shelmett experience.
Shelmett experience. So we have about a little less than 15 minutes left. I'd like to open up to any questions. So if you have a question, you can type in the chat box. You can also raise your hand and I can call on you. But we can probably just keep riffing on all of this too. Talking about how wonderful Michael Shelmett is.
Well, we could show it. And
oh yeah, that's true. That's something. So here, let me go share my screen.
So not everybody has this link yet. I think if they join.
Oh yeah, let me put the link in the chat first. And I think Stacy's going to also put it in our guide for OER. So yeah, let's take a look. So this is the welcome page, and here are the sections that we had been talking about, that the 7 sections that we had been using. So anything specific you all would like me to show?
Can we see the snazzy header?
Oh yeah.
Pretty. Oh, look at see.
Got some books. Got an introduction. I can show one of the sections I contributed to, writing and citing, which actually has quite a bit that Anne wrote about, using information that you found, and what ethical use looks like, why plagiarism is what it is, all of that. And I know we talked about looking at what was the reading that you said you'd observed a class, Fred? It was
backpacks and briefcases. That would be in the finding and responding to secondary sources.
Okay.
Because that's this assignment that they're working on now is a little further.
Yeah, I think, oh yeah, right here it is. There's one. Yeah, I think this was one of the readings I had looked at too, because I was curious about it. I think one of the things I got out of this was, looking at resources that I hadn't necessarily seen before.
Mhm. Right.
which was really great for me.
I mean, as long as you're here, one of the core syllabus for the new folks and for anybody who wants to use it, there are people who've been around who still use it. You had you could either do a rhetorical analysis or you could do a critique, and that would be what you would do for project 2 in English 101. So in this section, responding to secondary sources, you have a couple of different resources for each one. So if you're going to write, if I were teaching it, I might use the critique exercise of Stephen Krauss, and the people that I was looking at are using the backpacks versus briefcases one. You can either you can use one or the other, or you can look at them both and let students pick whether they want to do a critique or whether they want to do a rhetorical analysis. The important thing about that assignment was that students had to find a secondary source that was good, relevant, useful, and they would have to write some kind of essay that analyzed it in one way or another. So the rhetorical analysis analyzes the way in which the person who wrote it made their argument, and the critique is looking at the different ideas in it and figuring out what you think is valid or what you think is less valid.
I think it's interesting though, because they also do in high schools, they do analysis of writing and they're taught to like annotate and things like that. But I think one of the things that we do at Drexel that's a little bit different from that is asking them to respond to the reading. We talk about joining in a community of research. And I think one of the things that we do particularly well in the English department and at Drexel in general is drop them into that kind of early on. So we have them doing primary research, so they're creating actual knowledge themselves. I think this is kind of changing your relationship with sources. This and then the idea of like creating a research plan where you're actually designing what you're going to do. You have your own question. It's not just, well, what's in the library and that's what I use. And I just mush it together on a ball and deliver it. Of having, actual thoughts of your own and responding to a source on a level where you have some sort of authority yourself. And I think that's a mind shift for a lot of them that I think is really productive.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that is something different I've noticed about the program at Drexel is that idea of, well, you're going to have different types of information you'll use. And one of those types of information is something that you go out and gather yourself. And it's shifting. I think sometimes it's hard for students who come in with this idea of what a primary source is. And they think, oh, a primary source is an interview someone did or a photograph someone took. And it's like, no, it can also be something that you contribute. So trying to understand that I know is probably difficult for some students.
Right. So this annotated bibliography stuff was added later. This was added when we started thinking, let's get some 102 stuff in here. Also, that section on argument. I was initially thinking there were 6 sections. Well, yeah, there are 7 because we added an argument one for 102, and it's possible that there's more good stuff about arguments out there. We were a little hasty here, but look at these people arguing. What a good time there. So some critical thinking stuff, some fallacy stuff, and I'm using the basic structure and content of argument under sources for argument. Oh no, there's lower. About how to making academic arguments.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I got distracted from some links that I was like, oh, I changed that link. in terms of how it's embedded, which is an accessibility thing. That was another thing that I know when I was looking at this, I'm thinking about accessibility, because that's something I kind of triggers me in a way. So I see these links up here and I'm like, oh, that link is just a floating link. It needs to go and be embedded in the title. So, but that's the great thing about this is it's not like it's a bad and a good thing. It's not a frozen printed matter. We can go back and change it and make additions, which is also, it's never done.
Right.
Yeah. So anything else you'd like me to show, or anything else you want to add? Something that we didn't get to that you're like, oh, wait, everyone needs to know this.
I think one other thing that might be worthwhile if people are trying to put this together is thinking about audience, because as some people were dropping things in here, they were really talking to their colleagues. Like, hey, this is a really good source for this. And then as editors who are trying to be inclusive and welcoming of our peers' stuff, it was kind of like, well, that doesn't really go for when you're talking to the students, right? Unless it does. But a lot of the comments that were put in there maybe weren't. So helping to clarify exactly who the reader is intended to be, or how that's going to work, because it always feels awkward to edit and cut other people's ideas.
I think a good thing is just, like everyone has said, it was the right time and the right place, and that you can do it, get people from your department together, and you have a purpose and a reason for doing, open access materials, and it can be done. It's not, like this huge unwieldy project. It is possible, especially if you take it, I think, chunk by chunk. It's not like Brett said, we're going to do it all 101, 102, 103, and do it all in the summer. Like, let's just start with 101 and divide it up. So I think it's, when you have, Fred managing it, and, Maria have structure, and then Ann was editing, and the rest of us contributed. It turned out really well for over a very short period of time. I was like, on your mark and set, go. But it turned out well. So that's cool.
Yeah.
Although we have a lot of diverse sources, like Chris passed a TED Talks, and so there's a lot of really rich things. Also, a lot of them are from the same publications, right? Those people have the grants and the time to create a whole text. So as those are identified, that could be a useful way to do any updating or replacing we need to do as newer texts come out. So, and that's where the many hands really made light work, because I didn't know all these sources existed, but Fred had some and Margene had some, and everybody brought a little bit in. So we ended up with a lot of options.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to just stop my share for now. So we have a couple more minutes left. Any other final thoughts, any other final questions that we didn't get to that folks would like us to address? Panel, any final thoughts?
Thank you very much for organizing this, Elise and Larry and Stacy.
And Stacy, big thanks to Stacy.
Thanks to Stacy. And also, Elise, especially thanks to you for all your help at every stage of this thing. This was done by a lot of people, and it's one of the things I'm more proud of than other things that I've been doing. So thank you. That sounded wrong, but I'm very proud of what happened with this.
Yeah, I am too. And I especially think about the number of students who potentially may be affected by that. And I kind of think like, that's a really great thing. So thanks. I'm glad we were able to, work on this, and hopefully there's more work. It sounds like there's more work to do in the future. So I think that's a good place to end us. And thanks to all of you for being here.